So, know my height and my welcome. It's really nice to have you all here. What we're going to do today, we're going to talk about needs assessments in a time of change because the system's changed quite a bit in the last couple of years. So it's a three-part series we're running. The first one was about like the whole system and how it comes together. This one's about the needs assessment process and how that works. And then the third one is about individualized funding, and we're going to run that one next week. So you don't have to come to all three, but it possibly makes a bit more sense if you came last week, but it's all good. So when we talk about needs assessments, today we're going to talk about kind of what is a NASC, the people who do the needs assessments. We're going to talk about some of the stuff that's changed. We're going to talk about how to be prepared before a needs assessment, during a needs assessment, after a needs assessment, and some of the things that you can do when you've got review time or some tips and tricks that I just like people to know if they're on this journey themselves. So, last week, I talked about the kind of structure of the New Zealand government. So we go, there's the government, and then in this instance, we're talking about the Ministry of Social Development. That's where the government funding is coming through. And then within the Ministry of Social Development, which does heaps of different things, we're talking about disability support services. So that's the main part of the Ministry of Social Development that's supposed to be providing services to disabled people. And then disability support services contract needs assessment services. So we call them a few different things. We call them NASCs, which stands for Needs Assessment Service Coordination. We call in mid-central, they disestablished their NASC and they made a new thing that's actually part of the Ministry of Social Development called Mana Whaikaha, but it does pretty much the same thing in a slightly different way. And then in Christchurch and Waikato, they've got a two-part system. They have a traditional NASC, and for certain people under certain circumstances, they have the ability to access support through the EGL sites. But that's only if you meet certain criteria. In Christchurch, it's about being a school leaver with certain criteria, and in Waikato, it's a fixed number of people. And so if you happen to be one of the number of people, that's lovely, but they haven't extended that recently. So basically it's quite a limited pool of people that can be in that system. So for most of the country, there is one NASC. That's all you need to know about. And when I talk today about NASC, I'm talking about all of those different iterations because the advice that I'm giving applies across all of them. What they can actually refer you to and some of those details change across the different regions, but actually the function, the preparation is pretty much identical. So, what is an NASC? Really important question for this conversation. So, NASCs are contracted, they're organisations that are contracted by the Disability Support Service part of Ministry of Social Development to assess which disabled people are eligible for support and what support it is that they need. That is their function, that is why they exist, that is their role in the system. NASCs themselves, they're independent organisations. So some of them are charities, some of them are businesses, some of them are part of the local DHB, some of them do heaps of different things, and some of them only really provide NASC services and not much else. So it was more than 20 years ago now, they put out a contract and said, who would like to be a NASC? And the organisations who are our current NASCs got those contracts. Sometimes there's been changes. So there's been some NASCs absorbed by a bigger one or another organisation, but they've never gone back out and said, we'd like to find new NASCs. So the biggest one is definitely Aotearoa, and that's an organisation that didn't really used to exist, or at least with that title, not so long ago. And it's now, I think, the NASC for 5 or 6 regions, as they've kind of slowly absorbed other little providers. But largely, it's really important to know that they're not a government organisation. They're standalone business run in the way of every other business. They can only send you on to services contracted by DSS. They might tell you other things exist, but when they do a proper referral, they're only sending you to contracts to providers that the government have already said, yes, this is a service we like. This is one of the limited options that we can offer to you. So things like flying kites, where I work, we don't have any government contracts. So a NASC can tell you we exist, but they can't actually refer you to us. They can say, here's the website or here's the email address, but they don't actually do a referral where it all just magically happens behind the scenes. Because almost always they only refer to services who have a contract with the ministry. There is other NASCs. So there's a NASC for older people, for people over 65, and there's a NASC for mental health. So different parts of the health system use the same model, but our NASCs are standalone, separate from those other ones, unless the company in your region has both contracts, but primarily they're different systems and they don't overlap. They're really keen on you being kind of a compartmentalized human where this bit's disability and this bit's the other factors. If you don't know who your NASC is, it's usually pretty easy to Google, but there is an organization called NASCA who is like the organization that draws together all the different NASCs, and NASCA have a list of the NASCs across all the regions if you needed to have a look. And at the end, I'll post all these in the chat for you to follow the links if you want to. So what does a NASC do? It's pretty much there in the title. NASC stands for Needs Assessment Service Coordination. So they are an organization that does needs assessments and service coordination. They hold a budget on behalf of the Ministry of Social Development for disability supports in your region. And their job is to say, we've got this much money for our region, and this is across all the disabled people, how we're going to divvy up the money that is available for people to get the help that they need. It's not a perfect system because it doesn't kind of adjust for huge amounts of new referrals or changes in the system or changes in the needs of that community. But it's the system we've got. And it's the only door in. You can't bypass your NASC. You can't go to a different one. There isn't a choice of NASCs, except when there are those two exceptions in Waikato and Christchurch. You can't get around it. You have to go through your local NASC. So what do? They do needs assessments, which is identifying the needs of disabled individuals. So they sit down with each individual, they find out what their needs are, and what they can do within the scope of the system. And then they do service coordination, which is now that we've identified your needs, which services could we offer you to help you meet those needs? So that's kind of their main function. That's the thing that they're there to do, but there's heaps more detail to it. So I'm going to keep talking. Anyone can refer to an ASK. So they encourage referrals from professionals. They like referrals from GPs or psychiatrists. Whoever gave you a diagnosis is usually a person they'd like to get a referral from. And sometimes that means you get referred faster, but everyone is allowed to do a referral. There is no kind of you must be qualified in some way. Everyone can fill in that form if they want to, but you need to have a document that says that you meet the eligibility criteria. So you've got to have a piece of paper that says you have been diagnosed with this, and this is a disability. So it doesn't have to say the words you meet the eligibility criteria, but it has to say, this person has cerebral palsy, or this person has autism, or this person has whatever it is. So you need to have proof, basically. And my advice definitely is don't put that step off. If you're umming and ahhing about bothering, always do it earlier than you think you need it, because it can take a really long time from when you fill in a page on their website to when you actually get some help. Frequently, it takes a year. It can take more than a year. And they've recently had new referrals on hold in some regions and things like that. So it's really important that you ask as soon as you think you might possibly need that support, because otherwise you might be waiting a really long time for actual help to come out the other side. So what's eligibility criteria, right? Because I've just told you you've got to meet that. So Disability support services are available to people who have a physical, an intellectual, or a sensory disability, or who have autism, or who have a combination of those things. So it's got to be something that lasts for a while. It's got to last at least 6 months. And it needs to impact your ability to live independently and go about your life. So you have to actually have a need. Um, so that's the criteria, basically. It's for people under 65, because as I said, there's a different system for older people. And you have to be eligible for publicly funded services. So that's a key part of the system. So, like, that's for some people really simple. There's a piece of paper that very clearly says this person meets this criteria. For other people, particularly when things are acquired later in life, people who have aneurysms and things like that later on in life, it's much less clear um, for some people whether or not they meet that criteria because they may have some impacts to their abilities, but not necessarily something that neatly ticks one of those boxes. And there isn't a lot more guidance available. It is a really murky place. So the thing you've got to do is get the best documentation you can get and submit it as early as you can. There is a team at every nest who is responsible for checking that you meet the eligibility criteria. And they, if you're one of those murky people, will be able to have a conversation with you about um, that murkiness and whether or not you actually meet the criteria. So they made some changes this year. There's been lots of changes in the disability system recently, but this year we made some more changes. DSS told us that they were making changes to needs assessments with the objective of making them more fair, making them more consistent, giving disabled people more choice and control. They also told us that they were going to do a better job of considering the inclusion and the needs of family and caregivers. So that's what they told us they were setting out to do. What that has actually practically meant is that the conversation they're having with families is pretty much the same. Conversation when they're sitting down with a disabled person and discussing needs hasn't substantially changed. What's changed is behind the scenes, the way that they enter that information into the system, calculate the services available to you. That bit has changed quite a lot, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that soon. But so while they announced they were making all these changes, fundamentally, from a user experience, it hasn't changed a lot. They put a hold on assessments at the beginning of the year of new people coming into the system, of people needing reassessments or just reaching their like 5 yearly review time. So they stopped doing them for a few months. Unfortunately, that means that the wait lists got a bit bigger because the NASCs all got quite overwhelmed with trying to teach every single one of their staff members this new system. Um, but they tell us largely that things are up and running again. It does seem that there are still a few regions that are holding off on referrals or reassessments, but most of the country is back up and kind of moving through the normal standard reassessment process. So, needs assessments. Great question. What are they? What's it for? So the purpose of a needs assessment is to identify your disability related need. Um, so you should get a needs assessment every 5 years is kind of the maximum distance between a needs assessment. But that's kind of the frequency. Some people have had them every 3 years. If you've got a condition that changes rapidly, they do have mechanisms to make sure you have those conversations more often. But most often, it's every 5 years that you have the big in-depth conversation. Um, they can be in person, they can be on video or on the phone, and you can ask for the format that suits you best. There isn't a like they will often pick the thing that's most streamlined for them, but you can actually pick the thing that suits you best and advocate for that. So when they call you and say, we would like to have a needs assessment, we're going to do a video call. If you are not a video call person, you tell them that they need to come to your house and they do need to accommodate that. That is their job. That is a requirement of them. And usually that conversation takes an hour or two. Um, it really depends on your needs assessor and how chatty you are, but that's the kind of ballpark they give you is about an hour and a half. So, disability related need is a key word in there, that's their job, is to work out what the disability related need is. So when we say that, it's about the support that you need that differs from what the majority of the community needs. So it's about considering your age, your kind of stage of life, your um, kind of family situation, all those different factors, and then saying most people at that point in life need this, and you need this different thing, and trying to be able to work out which pieces of that are related to your disability. So, for example, when we look at a 4-year-old child, we go actually, most 4-year-old children, they need help to dress, they need help to cook their dinners, they need help to get out and about in the community or go to the doctors. They don't know when to get their hair cut or they're not safe to shower on their own. That's standard for most 4-year-olds. So at that point, they tend to not give us very much support because most 4-year-olds need quite intensive support from somebody else. But by the time you're 14 or 24 or 40, how much input you're usually getting in those tasks changes quite dramatically. So even by 14, we expect that 14-year-olds, most of the community are getting themselves dressed by themselves. They can make themselves a snack. They can be in the room by themselves for extended periods of time. And so the disability related need is saying, in your situation, is that the case? Or in your situation, is more support needed, and what for and why? So that's the job of a needs assessment, is to try and find out this is what most people need and this is what you need and what's the difference between those two things. Um, and it does change really dramatically through childhood, but also when there's big life changes is another point that we need to make sure we're getting needs assessments when people are leaving school, moving out of home, those sorts of things. It's really a key time to be able to stop and go, actually, when most people move out of home, what does that look like? When I move out of home, what does that look like? So that we can articulate what's the disability related need quite clearly. Um, so we've got on our Flying Kites website a pretty document that helps you think these things through. It's kind of a shortened, condensed one-page version of everything I'm talking about in this video. But if that's helpful to you, then do go and have a look at it. Again, I'll give you the link later. But it just is kind of making sure that people go to those conversations prepared. So, before your needs assessment, I really recommend that people write down what they think their disability related need is. Some people, they like to write a day or a week or a however long list of what like a really good day is and what a really bad day is. I really encourage you to think about the times where things are not normal, when somebody's sick, when it's school holidays, when a big change is happening. So think about those scenarios as well, so that you can kind of be really clear in your mind. Spend a week noticing how often you're getting support with this, how often there's prompting around that, what systems and mechanisms you've got in place, so that you can clearly articulate to the needs assessor exactly what is going on. And gather some evidence and examples if you need to, so that there is kind of it's not just you saying, oh, well, sometimes these things happen or sometimes those things happen. Actually having some like it's happening like this or this often, and giving them some clear stories that illustrate it, particularly stories that illustrate the risks that you have, or that you're worried about, can be really beneficial. If there's fall risks, if there's risks of road safety, sometimes when they go, we go out and I get a bit worried, the needs assessor doesn't take it very seriously. And when you're like, like, I know that they could run out in front of a car, or I know that if I didn't have two people with me in the shower, this thing could happen. Um, it's really important that you're clear and specific, because what we're prone to do is say sometimes. Well, sometimes they don't sleep very well. Sometimes these things happen. And we don't give the needs assessor detail. So they fill in the detail for us. That's their job. Their job is to hear your story and summarize it down into key points. I sat with a mum who was doing her needs assessment, and she said to the needs assessor, "Oh, sometimes he doesn't sleep very well." And the needs assessor wrote down, "Sometimes he doesn't sleep very well." And they were going off to interpret what that meant. And I'd heard the story and I knew all the details. And so I said, "You need to be clearer than that. Tell them what sometimes he doesn't sleep very well means." And mum said, "Oh, okay. Well, probably 5 nights a week, he'll start the day at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I have to get out of bed at 3 o'clock in the morning because the risks and the damage and the history of what's happened before. So yes, so I start my day at 3 o'clock every morning because I've learned the hard way that if I don't, these things happen." Um, and that's a really different story from "sometimes he doesn't sleep well." But it's her life. It's her every day. And so when she says it, it is sometimes. It is just doesn't sleep well. To me, that is, I can't imagine starting my day at 3 o'clock every morning with somebody who's very awake and making a lot of noise. But that's her life. And so for her, it's business as usual. And for a needs assessor, that is the difference of how much respite funding you get, because that is a huge difference starting your day at 3 o'clock every morning. So be really clear when you can be, and sometimes having that little list of what does your day look like can help to explain that to somebody outside of your family, because sometimes you've lost perspective, right? For her, it was just business as normal. Days start at 3 o'clock in the morning with screaming and yelling and smashing stuff. That's not normal in my house, but that's normal in hers. And so it didn't occur to her that the details were important. Um, so DSS would like us to be more prepared for our needs assessment. So they made us some mind map tools, which you might like and you might not. It depends on your brain. But on their website, there are different mind maps for different stages of life. There's kind of preschool and school and leaving school, I think, and adulthood. Um, where it asks you some key questions about the supports that you've got, what you do in the community, and those sorts of things. So it can be a nice um, thing to help you think through what you might like to raise with the needs assessor. But it's not as detailed as what time do you start your day, which I think is important. Um, if you aren't great in these meetings, I really, 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 really encourage you to take somebody with you to a needs assessment. Doesn't matter who that somebody is, somebody that you can give clear instructions to. It's in fact not always somebody you like the most, but somebody who you can give a job to and they will do their job. Because my best advice is write down that schedule or that like average week, and then write down a list of things you really need to tell this needs assessor. The stories that are important, the details like what time the day starts. Write those things down that you think will make a difference or you think that the needs assessor hasn't properly understood before. And as you go through the conversation, cross them off. So as somebody shows up, as they ask for what happened there, what's the deal with this, you go through and you're like, yes, I've told them the story about that time this thing happens, and yes, I've told them about this thing. Talk to them about sleep and cross it off. And if I get to go to somebody's needs assessment, which I try not to do because they're horrible things, um, I get that list, and my job is to make sure that you tell all of those stories. So when they get to the, have you got any other questions? Anything else we haven't covered? You go through your list and you go, I didn't tell you about that time. I really need you to know about this thing that happened. Or I don't think I've explained to you this stuff. If you know that you find it really hard to tell them how hard things are and really hard to actually show them that maybe things are not okay, give that job to the person you bring to the needs assessor. Tell them what their job is. Your job is to sit quietly and hold my hand. That's a valid job. Your job is to go through the list and make sure I don't miss anything. Really valid job. Your job is when they get to the questions about respite that you say, actually, I need to step in here and tell you that the amount of work this person is doing is not realistic or whatever. It's sometimes really hard for us to be that vulnerable. It's sometimes really hard for us to tell the whole story. And so take someone to your needs assessment. And if you need to, give them that job, or write it down. Sometimes it's easier. Some people's brains work better if you write it down, and you can write things down and send it to your assessor. and say, look, it was easier for me to tell you about, kind of how we're coping in an email. So I've sent that to you to go alongside the needs assessment. So the other piece in there, just thinking about how you're preparing for the needs assessment, is thinking about the language that we use. So the needs assessor's job is disability related need, right? It's this neat little box as though that's separate from every other part of your life. Do be really clear when you use language that sounds like health or sounds like mental health. Some needs assessors will just take that entire pocket of your world and put it away. So, what I see a lot of is people with autism who don't like change in routine and don't like when new things happen. And I hear people describe that as anxiety. People say, oh, they get really anxious when something changes, or I get really, kind of overwhelmed and anxious and stressed when routines don't go like I'm used to. And that's fair, that's valid, that's the language we use every day, but it sounds like it's anxiety. It sounds like it's mental health. It doesn't sound like it's autism. And so, what we need to also make sure that we do is that we use language that says this is about sensory overwhelm. This is about executive functioning. The words that people think are related to autism, or the words that people think are related to your disability, can be really, really helpful to use. And even naming it, saying, oh, sometimes I call it anxiety, but I know it's really related to my autism because of my autism, I don't like change. Whatever those things are for you, it's just watching out for the language around being really tired. And so we often talk about with physical disabilities, it's often, like I get really tired at the end of the day, and so I need help. And so when you've also got a health condition, they go, well, that's because you're tired because of the health, you're not tired because of the disability. And so it's a stupid game that we play, but it does really make a difference to be very clear that the stuff you're talking about is related to your disability diagnosis, not any other diagnoses that you have in your life. I know that you're a whole human and that you can't neatly divide yourself into boxes, but your job in this meeting is to try and put as many of the challenges you have in life into the disability box. And so writing down your language and even practicing that might be really helpful before a needs assessment. Okay, so they've added a new piece to disability supports, which is that now we're supposed to also have a My DSS plan. So part of this updated process is that we're supposed to be spending our funding in relation to our focuses and our purposes and our goals. And so rather than saying, here is funding for respite, now we need to have purposes for our funding that is going to do these things. Now, instead of saying you can have personal care support, it's got to be tied to a purpose. And now we don't have the purchasing rules around individualized funding. Instead, we've got these purposes related to our goals. It's really fun at the moment because we don't have My DSS plans. They've done those for like 1% of the population. So the rest of us are all just waiting for our turns and using them based on our own assessment of our goals. But over time, we're all going to get this little plan. However, they're not really goals. They talk about it like it's a goal plan, but it's really quite high level themes. So it's not the goal is to attend dance class on Tuesdays. The goal is to engage in the community. The goal is to increase community participation or something ridiculous like that. And actually, there's only about 17 goals that we can pick from. There's not like your specific goals. It's just at a high level, they're tagging your funding to particular purposes and saying, cool, we're giving you this money to help you with this particular part of your life. Again, fundamentally, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference to you other than knowing that they're going to come to you and go, now we're going to make your My DSS plan. So don't be freaked out. So then you have a needs assessment. Don't tidy the house. Don't make yourself look as presentable as possible. If you're stressed, be stressed. If you're tired, be tired. If you need to cry, cry. But don't put on a show for them. But also don't make everything tidy and pretend everything's grand. Watch out for the broad sweeping questions of like, oh, it seems like you've got that all in hand. Make sure that you actually tell them the stuff that's going on and that is important to you. And take someone with you. If this is not your happy place, if you don't feel confident standing up for what's really going on, remembering all the bits, take someone with you to that meeting. After your needs assessment, this is the bit that's maybe slightly different than it used to be. They write up a summary of your conversation. So they used to have every different NASC around the country had a different form. Now we only have one form. So now they have a conversation with you and they're really clear that that conversation should be unique based on how you are best engaged with. It's not one needs assessment conversation that every single person has to go through. They're supposed to talk to you and gather the information in the way that is right for you. And then they go away and they type it into this generic form. So there's this new system that they've created, and it's got a fancy name, which is the OBEAR tool, which stands for the Outcome-Based Indicative Range. And basically, all the information they've always gathered in your needs assessment gets typed into the little boxes of this computer system, and then the computer system will calculate the amount of funding or the amount of support that's available in your situation. If you have a really high level of funding and that kind of residential care level of funding, they use a different tool called the band allocation tool or the BAT. But again, the fancy words are not particularly important to you. You don't need to be able to use their language. They shouldn't even really be talking about it to you. It's just knowing that now there is one form that the whole country's NASCs use. And the important bit is they write a narrative into each of the boxes. So they say, when it comes to getting up in the morning, Ainsley's really great at this, but she needs a lot of prompting. It would be good to have some more support around these things, and her goal is to be more something. They write the little story about you, right? And then there's a whole lot of drop down boxes. And so the drop down boxes says when Ainsley showers, she needs this, this, and this. She needs 2-to-1 support, two people helping me in the shower, or she needs occasional prompting, or anywhere in between. There's a whole lot of drop down options. And that happens throughout this needs assessment. So they write the story and then they tick a drop down box about the different parts of life. How independent are you getting ready in the morning for showering, for brushing your teeth, for remembering those things? How much support do you need with emotional regulation and staying calm and stuff during the day? All the bits. And actually, what we've learned is that in this new system, it's those drop down questions that are what they're using to decide how much funding is available to you. So the fun trick is that they're going to print you the narratives they've written, just like they always have. They should have always shown you what they've written about you and asked you to confirm you're happy with it. That still happens, but by default, they will only share the narrative with you. They won't share what they picked from the drop-down boxes. They can if you ask. So if you say, I'd like to see the whole assessment, including the drop-down boxes that you filled in, then they will share it with you. It's information about you, and they have to. And it shouldn't be a fight. It should just be, oh, okay. But it is a good thing to know that particularly if you're going for a reassessment, hoping to get more funding or feeling like the needs assessor didn't really see you properly, then checking what they've ticked in those boxes could be really, really helpful. And equally, largely things roll over. They should all be doing a wonderful job. At the moment, that's happening manually. So they haven't got their magical algorithm right behind the scenes. So at the moment, somebody is sitting there in Wellington and reading every single needs assessment and putting everybody in a little funding box. But once they've kind of got that sorted, it will happen largely by a computer and then checked in the individual regions. They're doing some like cross-referencing to check it works, but over time it will become more and more about what answers are put in those drop-down boxes. And then they've talked about maybe getting AI to be able to analyze the narratives that people have written, but I don't think they're quite there yet. So they do that, and then they come up with something that they're proposing to you. Your job is to ask questions until you understand what they're offering. They've gone away, They've sent you a report back. You read that report and don't sign it till you understand what it says. Don't say, yes, we're happy with this until you understand. Largely, they'll send it back to you and say, could you get this back to me by Friday so that I can know, so that I can send it off to my boss or whoever. If you need 2 weeks, tell them you need 2 weeks. Mostly their time frames are arbitrary, but they're really smart these days and sending you something back that says, if you don't get back from me to me by Friday, I'll assume that you agree. And lots of us don't have time. Lots of us are overwhelmed. If you need more time, tell them you need more time, but do read it and do check it because that is what your funding is being calculated off. And then if they call you and they say, we'd like to offer you some fancy word that you don't know what it means, ask them to describe that service to you. If they're offering a service to you different than what you were expecting, if you were hoping to get individualized funding and they're not giving you individualized funding, or if you were hoping to get supported living and they haven't given it to you, ask them why. Because often what I see is that they look at someone and they go, oh, you're pretty overwhelmed. You might not be able to handle individualized funding. So we won't give you that extra stress. We'll just leave you with what you've got already or whatever. And so they don't ask you what you want. They're just assuming behind the scenes that this is what's going to suit you best. So clarify with them. Ask them, is there another way I could receive that support? Is this the only contract option? Or can you tell me why? Why did you pick this way for me to have it? Because, like I say, often if you then put forward an argument about how you did want that other thing, sometimes they're able to swap it over to a different option. They just didn't want to overwhelm you with too many choices, so they made a choice for you, for better or worse. Um, you can challenge the amount of funding that you get, the support that they offer you. Most often, though, particularly now in this new system where the computer is deciding what support you need to tell them about something that they didn't see. Read that needs assessment and go, I really don't think you understood how big a deal this thing is. And so highlighting to them what you think that they've missed is the best way to get some extra support. Um, rather than just saying, well, I was expecting double that. Well, you're misguided. It's kind of their easy option. You don't understand what most people get. Whereas saying, like, I really don't think that you've understood how big a deal the dramas in the morning are because of the blah, blah, blahs, is a much more likely way to get them to review whether or not they're giving you the right amount. Um, it is a proposal, and it's definitely there's room to change between contracts. But generally, particularly now that dollar value is not particularly negotiable within a couple of grand. But if you aren't happy, it's good to know that NASCs they're under pressure to control costs, right? They don't have a lot of flexibility in how much they're allowed to give people. And this new system is actually about taking away more of their autonomy so that they can only give you what fits outside the box and not listen to the story as much as the tick box is. But do push back on reductions or a lack of increase when you need to. By no way is their cost pressure your problem. So do make sure that if you are unhappy and it's not going to be okay, that you tell them that. And what I guess I look at and I say they've told us that they're trying to make needs assessments consistent across the country so that one system gives fair results for everybody because they kept saying we had a postcode lottery where some people were getting more and some people were getting less than others. What that implies, right, is that some people now need to get more and some people now need to get less so that it's fair. Um, they're not kind of owning that, and they've cut a lot of the budgets over the last couple of years so that they were able to avoid that. But it is a reality of the situation is that as they go through a new way of working out people's fundings, there's going to have to be a recalibration that happens. If you want a complaint to be taken seriously, I really encourage you to use the word complaint. So if you are trying to make a complaint about what's going on, then send them an email that says, I would like to make a complaint about something or other. And that is different from I'm not really very happy with what happened, or I think I should have double, or when you use the word complaint, it triggers it into their complaint system, which is what you need often in those situations. And you can turn to organisations like the Nationwide Health and Disability Advocacy Service. Carers New Zealand have been quite fantastic in this changing process, and the Health and Disability Commission are just some of the places where you can go and make a complaint or try and get somebody to fight on your team. Largely, they're pretty overworked, overwhelmed people. But again, just because they don't have capacity to do all the things doesn't mean we shouldn't be asking for help. So if you are stuck, do ask for help. And so then each year they're supposed to check in on your support and roll it over or change it as needed. Often these days, they're not even calling people to check, they're just rolling over the funding you had before. Um, but if you know that things have changed, I really encourage you to raise that a couple of months before your rollover date of whatever support you're getting. So rather than waiting until a week or two before your funding changes, go to them a couple of months before because they have huge wait lists. They're taking a really long time to work through things. And if you appear 2 weeks before your funding and ask for something to be different, what usually happens is that they can't do that before the rollover of date. And so then they make it a much bigger and more detailed process. Whereas sometimes if you get it right and you go, look, it's been 3 years since our last increase and since our last assessment, and we don't need a full reassessment, but I was just, this has changed or that's changed, or, sometimes they can just chuck a couple more hours in without having to do a big reassessment. And sometimes they can't, but ask a couple of months before your rollover date, not a week before your rollover date. And you can ask for a reassessment at any point. The system is built to assume that you are a human and that things change. There are lots of people with disabilities that are really variable, and lots of people with disabilities that are, that rapidly deteriorate, that need more and more support quite frequently. So the system is built to handle those things. They don't want to do reassessments. It's a huge amount of work for them, and then they also spend more money when you get more support. Um, but that's not your problem. So do ask for a reassessment when you need one. And then my last tips and tricks, that I talk to a lot of parents who come to me and they say, I'm trying to get an increase in our support because I really need to go back to work. And so they need to understand that they need to fund me for this so that I can go back to work. That is not a disability related need. It is undeniably an important need and a very, very valuable and vital piece of the world. But it is not a disability related need. So when you're in those situations, you need to work out how to structure your argument related to disability. My child can't go to after school care because of these situations. We can't use babysitters, or I can't leave them with Nana because of these situations. It's not their problem that you need to work. Everybody needs to work. The problem, I don't like problem, the thing that they need to focus on is what is related to disability and how do we use disability as the language to get that support right. Um, and again, in that asking for reassessments, also if things are changing, leaving school, moving out of home, don't appear on the nest doorstep and saying, I'm going flatting next week. I need twice the funding I had before. You need to kind of give them a couple of months to do that. Um, but also, particularly around leaving school, there seems to be a lot of regions that are kind of making people hold on and not give them reassessments in that last year of school. I'd really encourage you to push that as hard as you can to make sure you get a reassessment when school's coming to an end. Um, and really, my other advice is talk to each other. Is that we don't, as a system, we don't talk to one another and compare funding. And so I talk to families who go, oh, we're so lucky. We get 3 hours of support in a week. It's fantastic. And then I talk to another family who is like, I can't believe it. We only get 25 hours of support in a week and we need blah, blah, blah. And those families are reasonably comparable. And one person thinks they've won the lottery with their 3 hours, and one person's really unhappy with their 25. Because we don't talk about it. You don't know. You don't know what other people get. And it's an awkward topic, right? It feels a little bit like talking about your salary or your mortgage or your something. But actually, it's really important. It's really important for us to get a picture so you can go, oh, okay, well, I know that that kid's a bit like this and a bit like that, and they've got this and I've got that. Hmm. Because otherwise you don't know how hard you should fight. I talk to so many people when I go, like it's really reasonable that you're asking for this extra help. They go, okay, I wasn't sure. Um, it's really worth talking to people. Make the most of school drop-offs or sitting by the pool at Special Olympics or online community groups, going to parent support groups. Do raise the conversation. Be transparent. It's not your money. It's not like it's not, it's a personal thing, but it's also not. And you will genuinely, I meet so many families who go, I didn't even know I could get that. Nobody told me that support existed until way too late. People who didn't know there was a NASC system until they were in their 20s. People who didn't know that there was anything other than carer support in the system until their child left school. So do talk to each other if you can and share that information. Oh, this is flying kites and what we do. We do recruitment, helping people find amazing staff who fit with their needs and their way of life. We help people who are stuck, kind of goal planning and navigating the system. And then our website has some really cool resources like about individualized funding, needs assessments, and moving out of home. And because we're not government funded, we have no complicated paperwork and no eligibility criteria. We just want to help people who would like to be helped by us. So that is my whirlwind tour of needs assessments. I feel like I talked too long because we're nearly out of time. But it's nice to see you all again properly.